I've also consumed materials from some YouTube channels. You can see here, says Joseph, Cognitive Type, Personality Hacker, Type Talks, and there's probably many, many more. I just don't remember all of them. Aside from that, my main interest in this theory is obviously typing other people, because in order to make use of the theory, if your typing is not correct, your value with using the theory is very, very low. And typing is very tricky actually in this specific scenario. Of course, if it was easy, everyone is going to be doing it. But the self-assessment methodology for typing, I think, is not great. Like usually, people are not able to type themselves correctly using a test or anything else. And it's probably the best way to type is from someone who actually understands very clearly the theory, and not even one person, but multiple people to type you, and then you arrive at your correct type, or they can give you like some advice about what is your most probable type, like a top three or something. So this is one of the main topics we're going to discuss, hopefully at the end of these presentations. Yeah, moving on. These are the type of things we're going to start with. So we're going to explain some of these theories, what are my thoughts on these theories, and how, in my opinion, they lack in specific areas, and what the cognitive functions actually gives you as an alternative. And it also, of course, works in some areas, but I would say is the most accurate out of all of those other systems. Is the system that has the least amount of errors, in my opinion. So what are we going to do regarding the Jungian cognitive functions? So we will start with the history, how this model was created. So it was obviously created by Carl Jung. He was practicing psychology in medical setting for a long time, multiple years, like 40, 50 years. And during his practices, he discovered that people are similar in specific ways, and he tried to describe those specific ways using these cognitive functions, which are called Jungian cognitive functions, since he came up with the terms. These are the functions. Since his discovery, things have changed a lot. So we'll talk about the history, we'll talk about who are the main people related to development of the cognitive functions, as well as I would say the current leading phases of this theory and the branching of this model. So perception and judgment are the two main categories in the theory. I'll not go into detail in any of this. There will be a separate video for all of these things. I'm just going to list the things that I want to cover here. So there's also temperaments. We'll go into the individual functions. We'll explain what temperaments means later. There's also the cognitive axis, which is how some functions are related to each other, and how one function actually impacts another function in specific ways. So, for example, NI and SE are connected in an axis where a person who has one of the functions has the other automatically, and in a specific slot in their psychology. There's also hierarchy of the functions, which is definitely not a concept that is very obvious. So why should there be a hierarchy? Why should someone prefer one function instead of another? It's a very complicated topic actually. And then we'll also discuss some of the ways that you have the model appear. So different people support different kind of model. There's the four function model, which is your psychology only contains the four functions and everything else is discarded as information. There's also the eight function model, which was popularized, I think, by John Beebe, and is adopted by some people. Also, there's the four sides of the mind approach, which is C.S. Joseph is a fan of with his cognitive transitions, sort of things. So we'll discuss all these approaches and what I think about those as well. We will also discuss about the ego development. So what all of these models try to cover, in my opinion, is exactly this ego development, where there is this core self. So I'm going to be approaching this in a non-spiritual way. I'm only going to be talking about development of the ego, which I think is linked to all of those theories, especially the cognitive functions. I have, of course, my preferences in terms of the spiritual approach, like what is reality and what actually is the self ultimately, but I won't be discussing any of those here. I'll just be focusing on the ego. And here you have an example of how I consider the different things um, having impact on the ego. So there's the core self, which I think is covered by Jungian cognitive functions. And then there's, on top of this, there is gender. So in my opinion, core self is, like, Jungian cognitive functions are more basic than gender, meaning that if two people are the same gender, so two females, let's say, and they have different cognitive functions and different type, there will be more different than if two people are the same type but different gender. So a male and a female having the same type is more similar than let's say two people with the same gender but different type, which I think, this from my experience, what I've noticed, it's very important distinction is why core self is first and core self is linked to cognitive functions. Then there's this developed self, which is also a very, very important part of the self. But I consider this as what your environment has created for you. So during your development process, how what you've learned as behavior and how this affects your psychology as a whole. So this is obviously the nature versus nurture debate. So we'll discuss some of those things here. Then this is probably the cornerstone of what I want to talk about is the typological table. So we'll go through this table, how it is split. If someone is familiar with David Kiersey and his temperaments, this table is a bit different. I don't quite agree with his split for the sensor types, but we'll talk about this in a lot of detail. It's one of the cornerstone pieces. We'll really talk about what I consider to be temperament, very different than David Kiersey, although his work is of course great as well in this uh, topic. But the way he split it, there are some problems with it. Some things don't make a lot of sense. Also, we'll talk about this, which I called mode of operation, since I haven't found anywhere a very good representation of how to call it. By this, I mean the vertical split. So people who are introverted perception leads are very similar in specific ways, as well, of course, for all the other functions, the same thing applies. And we will talk about this, I'll call them mode of operations, how to recognize people of those types. We also talk about the temperaments, which is obviously the horizontal split. And we'll go through this table. Like, this table will be discussed in a very, very substantial detail. There's also quadrants to consider here as well, which is people who have the same use the same axis. But yeah, this is for later. I need to introduce first all the terms in order to go through this. Then we also cover typing people, which, as I said before, I think is one of the most important parts of this theory. And if you're not able to type people correctly, this theory's value is very, very, it's lowered a lot. And self-typing, as I said, like, it's not a great approach in my opinion. People just misjudge their own trait characteristics and they're not able to objectively look at themselves very well. So what kind of approaches we're going to look at? We're going to look at typing people using linguistic approach, which is whatever they say, the structure of the sentences. It's a very clear representation of the way their mind works. We also look at interaction styles by Linda Berens. Also, C.S. Joseph uses this as well, which is, we'll talk about it in more detail, but it's basically kind of connected to linguistic approach in some way, but in another way, it is a bit more abstract. So let's say one of the themes there is the extroverted types. You can say they're initiating, and then the introverted types are responding. So we'll explore some of those other types of interaction styles, how they link to this table here, and how to use this theory or an understanding of interaction styles to help you type other people as well, as yourself as well, maybe. Then we're going to analyze temperaments, mode of operations, and quadrants, which is another way to type. So we're going to analyze the modes of operation. So if you know the mode of operation, the temperament, the intersection between those is the type, right? So if you're able to accurately judge those, you're on your way to understanding what is the type of the specific person. So it's very, very useful information. And we'll also cover some visual typing things. I'm personally pretty big proponent of visual typing. I found it to be extremely useful, and I would say people who have advanced this theory most is cognitive type with Jason Duval. So this guy, you can find his work, of course, online and everywhere if you just search for it. But he has provided the best understanding, in my opinion, about visual typing. And I have some of my own uh, understanding there as well to add on top of this. So we'll try to do this as well. And at the end, we're also going to do a deep dive into each type. So I'm going to go through each of those 16 types, explain there. So what I want to cover is like the essence of the type. So what are the main things regarding this type, analysis of their function stack. So how the psychology, how their psychology is manifesting through their function stack. And then I'll discuss like common strong points, common weak points about this type, and I'll discuss interactions between this type and probably some of the other types as well, just to understand how things will look when two people of different types meet and what kind of um, points, what kind of specific scenarios they will have in which they agree and don't agree with each other. And hopefully at the end of this, I'm going to be trying to do some typing demos where I'll try to type the person using all the things that we learn throughout this presentation. And I'll try to use this holistic approach, which I call it, which is that I've been open-minded about how to type people and about like how this theory is developing. So I've tried to gather information from all different sources. As you saw, different books, different approaches. Like I want to integrate all of those possible ways to type people in a one holistic approach without judging uh, a specific way or using a specific way to do the typing. I think every way has some truths to it, and the most accurate way to type is to just use everything you have available to you. So this is what we'll focus on by the end of this course. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.